All right.
Elevator.
Hello and welcome everyone. Today's webinar promises to be a very insightful session, and we're absolutely thrilled that you've joined us today for our webinar on the science of trust, building psychological safety with hybrid teams. We are very excited to have one of our internal experts bringing you this topic today. So I'm going to turn this over to Jan Sweat here in just a second. Jan Sweat is the Vice President of Learning Solutions here at CHAP, and she brings over 25 years of extensive experience in building leaders and successful teams. She has a very unique background and an invaluable perspective on how to foster strong, cohesive teams. And building this trust is one aspect of that. So before I hand the floor over to Jan to introduce herself and kick us off, allow me to just cover a few basics for today. So first, this presentation is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be made available to all attendees and those registered shortly after we conclude our session today. We'll also be sharing with you a link to the slides. I will be putting that in the Q&A in just a little bit. And then lastly, I would just like to note that today's format is just a little bit different than our typical format. We're going to be using the chat for some interactivity today. So when asked to participate, we encourage you to type your responses in the chat, and we'll be leaving that open throughout the duration of our webinar today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jan to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm very excited to be here with you today and look forward to the topic that we're going to be discussing together. Like Denise said, I've got a very extensive background in home health, hospice, palliative, and home care. And, one of my favorite things that I did prior to coming to CHAP over 3 years ago was I got to do leadership development. And one of the things that is so hard in leadership development is really bringing your team together and making your team one. And so this topic is near and dear to my heart. I've done a lot of research before we got here together today, and I'm hoping to be able to share that with you, and maybe you'll take away a couple of nuggets that you're going to be able to use with your teams back in your marketplace. So with that, let's go ahead and get this party started. All right, so let's talk about, the neuroscience of trust. A very good researcher, Paul Zak, who is a physician that found that trust in the workplace is one of the most positive impacts to a company's performance and or employee turnover. And that sounds easy, right? We're just going to build some trust with each other. We're just going to all get along and it's going to be fine. Actually, building trust is really hard because trust is actually not a feeling, but it is a neurochemical response that we have within our brain. And we're gonna talk high level to these 3 topics, and then we're gonna unpack them on the next 3 slides. So trust isn't really a feeling, it's a neurochemical process, which I just talked about. When people feel trusted, they release oxytocin, which fosters connection, and that's connection uses empathy, which leads to trust. And, especially in our hybrid and remote teams, which is really kind of where we are in a post-pandemic world, right? It is much harder to build that trust and to build that cohesiveness within a team. So let's talk a little bit more about trust in the brain. So a really interesting study that Paul Zak did was he did a study and brought people into a room. And when he did that, he wanted to watch the oxytocin spikes. The oxytocin is what is called the trust molecule. It plays a central role in how someone does social bonding, has empathy, and psychological safety. And so the interesting thing about his research was that when we have that neurochemical boost, so when we have that boost in oxytocin, it increases collaboration and openness. And that's one of the things that I see missing oftentimes in a virtual environment. It's hard to be open with folks that you just don't feel connected to, right? And building that connection in a virtual environment or a hybrid environment can be very difficult. And but when you do that, and when you are able to do that, it promotes emotional resilience and a well-being for the individual, but it also encourages social behaviors that make hybrid work or remote work easier. And it is actually essential to have those teams be effective and work together. And when you have that oxytocin spike, it fosters trust. And when you feel trusted, your anxiety goes down, your team is strengthened, they're able to work better together as a team, meaning that they're going to be higher functioning and they'll feel psychologically safe within the team. How he did this, I'm going to give you just a really quick example of how he did this, is he brought a team, he brought two teams of people into a room. And he drew blood from both sides of the team. Each team didn't know each other and they didn't get to see each other, but he drew their blood so he had their oxytocin level at that moment. Then he gave them a task to do and they worked through the task. And those that trusted a complete stranger that they didn't see or never met, those that actually went ahead and trusted those people or the person on the other side of the screen that they didn't see because they have a screen up in between them, their oxytocin spiked drastically. And he figured that out by redrawing blood after the exercise happened. He even did it a second time, and the folks attending the group, every time they did it, their oxytocin would spike even higher. And it would make it to where you could tell that person's trust was growing and growing. On the other hand, you have cortisol. And cortisol is like your fight or flight, right? And it spikes when you're stressed or you're uncertain. And in certain situations, it's essential, right? You have to have that cortisol spike. But when you have that chronic elevation of cortisol, that's where we find the trouble. And in a hybrid environment, in a virtual environment, that can happen very quickly. And why do you think that can happen? I mean, it can happen because we misread communication. It can happen because we are not at the water cooler and having those little trust building conversations and those trust building interactions. And oftentimes in a remote environment, we miss those altogether. And that cortisol, when that is spiked, it impairs your decision making. So think about it. Whenever you've been in a stressful situation, you probably can handle that one task. But if someone else gives you another task, you're so ingrained on what's happening in that situation right then that you can't get past that cortisol spike. It also, cortisol spikes make people hold grudges, make people think the worst of others, make people have resentment towards activities that they're given. And that imbalance is when your cortisol's high and your oxytocin's low, that's when you have the issues with not feeling safe, right? Not having that psychological safety in your work environment. So truly being able to manage that oxytocin and that cortisol is a balancing act. And it is where you want to try to keep them even, if not the oxytocin a little bit higher. So let's unpack the next slide. So what causes that uncertainty or that cortisol spike? So the first thing, what are things that trigger stress and anxiety? And, some of the things that trigger stress and anxiety are the uncertain things that happen that we don't foresee coming. This leads to anxiety, especially when employees feel like they don't have control or clarity. And when someone feels like they have a lack of control over their sphere of influence or what they are quote unquote in charge of every day, yes, they still report to you as leaders. Yes, you still ultimately have to be accountable for what they're doing. But in that virtual environment, when you're constantly just asking questions or where they are and not having that quote unquote water cooler talk, that can increase that anxiety in that employee. And, uncertainty also erodes engagement and morale. And one of the biggest things that I see that erodes that engagement and morale is when your employees don't know the why behind the reason decisions are made. And I am sure that we all have an example of that, of having to, or maybe we've had to make a decision and told our employees this was the decision, but we didn't share the why behind why that decision was being made. So if you have an example of that, type it in the chat. And I'm going to give you just a couple of seconds because I have a couple of examples, but I don't want to take anybody's thunder from them. So I'm going to give you a chance to give me some examples yourself. While I'm waiting for chat responses, I'll go ahead and tell you one of the things that I've experienced in the past was when you had to make a corporate-wide decision that was going to impact the field, and people were felt very uncertain about it. For example, changing your EMR, that can really cause that engagement to go low, the morale to kind of go to drop. And that can really impact the uncertainty, right? And I'm sure you all have examples of that. But if we don't share the why with the folks that we are impacting directly in their day-to-day and what they're going to do, then you can for sure know that they're going to completely disengage, right? At least for a little while. The next thing that you talk about impacting uncertainty in those around us is the impact of uncertainty goes directly to performance and innovation. Let's see, someone put, when someone is fired and you actually cannot say why they are gone. Oh, I can appreciate that. And I have actually watched that happen as well. And I didn't think about that example before class, or this webinar, but you're absolutely right. That would erode the morale of those around them, right? And you can't say why they're gone, and because you wouldn't talk about a performance issue with others in the room, but it can most certainly put a damper on the morale or the engagement. Thank you very much for giving me that example. I'm sure others have that one as well. So and along the lines of the engagement morale, that also would impair performance and or someone thinking innovatively about their job. So it's that short-term mindset that they have that will affect their performance and not think outside the box of how they can actually do things differently to make their job better. Those thoughts are stopped at that time of uncertainty. And we're going to talk about a Forbes article on the next slide that really speaks to this, but uncertainty can really disrupt the cohesiveness, but also that innovation part of your team. And then the fourth thing about uncertainty is it increases burnout and turnover. And we've all seen this happen, right? We've all seen burnout and or turnover go up, and we've certainly seen this post-pandemic with prolonged not understanding what your role is because roles had to change so quickly, and then roles never went back when some organizations went back into the office, or people might feel uncertain about their role being retained or job security, or it can lead to not knowing the expectations, but it can also lead to folks being just emotionally exhausted. And you can see this happening. So you can totally see when this is happening in your offices, because that's when the absenteeism goes up. Folks are sick a lot. Folks are using up their vacation, taking more vacation time. Or you can see that you are having a lot of attrition. Your attrition is all of a sudden gone up. And when that attrition all of a sudden goes up, it's not just about the person that left, but it could be about the team and how decisions that are being made have affected the entire team. And all of these impacts of uncertainty lead to team dynamics. We all have things in our work that change, right? We all have things in our work that add to all of our workloads, and it happens all the time. And during that stretch phase, during that phase where we're allowing the new normal to become our actual normal, that's when teams can start to experience a little bit of frustration and resistance until they feel and they reach that new equilibrium point. And that oftentimes can affect how they feel, and it can affect the team dynamics in ways that you never saw it coming. So we've talked about the oxytocin and the cortisol. We've talked about the uncertainty, but now let's talk about why is building trust so hard. And building trust in a hybrid team is extremely hard. It is hard because we all have blurred boundaries between work and personal. And it's interesting because all of the team members, when they're working in a hybrid or remote position, they're feeling digital fatigue. Staring at a screen all day long is exhausting, right? And then when you're working from a home environment or a hybrid/virtual environment, those around you or those that you live with, you're also having to juggle those home responsibilities that when you went into four walls, you wouldn't necessarily have to do. So what are some things that you think can really help build those barriers or get over those barriers for those folks in hybrid environments? What have you done in the past? If someone can help me in the chat, what are some things that you've done to help with building that trust in a hybrid environment? Regular one-on-ones, love it. Okay. Open support and communication. That's perfect. That's on my list, actually. Communication is absolutely the key. Intentional team building activities. I love that. You know, I feel like that when we have those regular one-on-ones, it does increase that communication. And I feel like increasing that communication, I don't think you can over communicate. And I think one of the things that we all have to be cognizant of is to not let anyone on the team be caught off guard to the extent that you can, right? There are times as leaders that we can't share things, but there are also times that we can share things that can be very pivotal and important to the role that your team has. Consistent communication, start meetings with small talk. And the interesting thing with that and I'm glad you put that in there, but the interesting thing with start meetings with small talk is a lot of times you'll see who doesn't want to be engaged in that small talk, and that's the person that you might need to engage even more. Regular check-ins, having teams address concerns openly. I'm a big believer in that too. So if you have a couple of people and they are bringing you two sides of the same coin, to have them get together and work on it. I really like that. That's being very, very good and transparent. Transparency is so important. If you can share things, share them. You know, let's see, Ashley, we recently separated our work and personal phones so teams doesn't feel like they're working 24/7 text checks and making sure people are overwhelmed. I love that. That's a great idea. And you're right. A simple good morning on chat is very good. Like when you're entering a meeting or when you're entering a text message string. And I will tell you, I'll just go ahead and be transparent myself. Sometimes when I'm so focused, I forget to do that, right? You simply go into a meeting and say, hey, how's your day? Right? And I do that as well. And so I have to step back and intentionally say, good morning, or how are you? And it's not that I don't want to, it's just we all have our own list of things to do, right? So I told you about the Forbes article on the previous slide. So let's talk about there are 7 things that trust building behaviors that set great leaders apart. And the first one is to model consistency with word and action. Say what you're going to do and do what you're going to say and be predictable almost, right? The second one is to bridge the gap between strategy and execution. So and that goes back to the why. When people understand the why behind they're doing something, oftentimes they will get more engaged faster. And getting your folks more engaged faster is very important. And practicing transparency. So this is kind of a balancing act for you, right? Because there are many things that you can't share as a leader. And then there are some things that you can share. And I'm sure that we've all had the example of something that we've had to deliver that was a decision from above us, but you still have to deliver it. And the thing is delivering as much of that message as you possibly can to be transparent. Transparency with your people builds confidence. So when people have confidence in you, you'll reduce that friction, you'll reduce that anxiety that they may be feeling, and you'll also foster alignment within the team members themselves. That's really important. The fourth thing is to lead with empathy every day. And my opinion is that empathy is a core competency for leadership. And it's one of those things that if you lead genuinely, and listen deeply and allow people to speak, then your words will hold more space for the person that you're giving them to, but people will experience the feeling of not being judged. And being able to lead with empathy and allowing people to feel heard and not be judged is very important. And the fifth thing that Forbes says is important to make a great leader is to create a culture of accountability. It's okay if you have to hold someone to an expectation and offer feedback timely. We all have work to do. We all have things that have to get done within our day. So you can offer accountability, but remember, number 4, right above there was empathy. So you can hold people accountable, but you don't have to beat them over the head with it, right? And the one right below accountability, number 6, is lead with compassion. And I think, compassion is empathy in motion, right? So if you show that compassion for others, whether you're in agreement or not, that's not the issue. But if people feel that you're compassionate to them, then you will build a more cohesive team faster. And then 7, be fully present. And this is the other one that I can promise you I struggle with as well. And I think with most of the room, if we were raising our hands, struggled with not being distracted. One of the best and worst things that we've ever had is our cell phones. And I think there should be time, and this is hard to manage, and this is hard to monitor when you're in a hybrid or a remote environment, but putting your phone away. If we are saying that lack of water cooler time where we just are able to engage and speak freely and get those relationships with those around us is going to build up a better cohesive team, then why are we distracting ourselves? And especially in a virtual hybrid environment, people can see when you're looking down. people can tell with your eyes when you're multitasking and they're talking to you. If you're doing those regular one-on-ones, which several of you put in the chat was so important on a hybrid and virtual environment, then give that one-on-one to the person that you're speaking to. That's the time that you've promised to give them. And that's the time that actually they're giving you too, because it's just as important for you as the leader to have that one-on-one time as it is for those that you're working with. So we've talked about the 3 components of trust. Yes, Casey, I absolutely can repeat the 7 recommendations. Yes, absolutely. Let's do that really quick. So the first one is to model consistency and action, bridge the gap between strategy and execution, practice transparency, lead with empathy, create a culture of accountability, lead with compassion, and be fully present. You're welcome. All right, so let's talk about psychological safety by definition. So there's another study out there that talked about psychological safety, and it is a belief that people can basically be themselves and speak up and share what they feel they need to share without fear of retribution or getting in trouble, so to speak. But one of the things that they found, though, was that it doesn't mean that being nice will allow you to avoid arguments. So the interesting thing about the psychological safety, there's a couple of things, is everyone's input should be heard and considered. Doesn't mean that you're going to do something with everyone's feedback, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that it's 100% job security or everyone's going to feel like, no, I'll never lose my job, right? But what it means is that you're holding someone accountable, you still address concerns, but it's okay. What's interesting is people feel like having confrontations are really is a strong word in my opinion, but healthy friction, I have a leader that's used that word with me before. Healthy friction is okay. And when you can get past healthy friction and come out on the other side as a team, that actually makes your team stronger. And I'm not mean, and healthy friction means you're not throwing things at each other, you're not using language or being condescending with each other, but it is when you reach that what is trust, it's someone's belief that the person that they're working with is going to act in a predictable, reliable way. And they know what they're going to get with you. They don't feel your behavior's been consistent over time, and trust is built over time. It's not built on just getting to work with that person one time and then you've built trust with them, right? It doesn't really work that way. But that consistent behavior that you give as the leader on a regular basis, and you allow your team members to feel safe. And I'm a firm believer that if an employee is unhappy, that they should never complain across. They should always complain to you. And you should be able to hear that, take that feedback, because sometimes it may or may not be about you. And there may be things that you can't do anything about because it might be a company direction that you're gonna have to keep fostering, but they've at least felt heard. And sometimes that's all people need is to feel heard. And so one of the things that you can do is you can try to foster within each team, there's smaller teams, and you can foster that teamwork by putting each other together, putting people together to allow them to be inclusive of each other, to be open to feedback, and tolerant for what each other's doing within the team. Any team can withstand hardship if they feel like they have that trust and that safety within the team. But psychological safety is a shared belief. And it's a shared belief that we've got that trust and our team is safe for doing risk together and doing risky things together and being able to step outside the box that we're normally in and make bigger things happen. It's more of an environmental feeling and a collective feeling than an individual feeling. So how are we going to demonstrate, and what behaviors will lead to psychological safety? So being open to mistakes. Are you as leaders, and really kind of think about this. If what are you as leaders willing to say when you left a detail out and yeah, that's my bad, right? I should have told you that, didn't think it was that important, because you're just going through your day and doing your things, right? So it's okay to feel free to say that you've made a mistake. And so I think you asked a question of what do we do when an unhappy person keeps spreading how bad he or she feels without coming to you first. I think that actually goes back to the one-on-one and trying to get them in that environment where they will feel open to share it with you. And that's going to come with time with someone like that. And sometimes you can't get everyone there. And you also have to realize that that's okay too, if you can't get everyone there with that feeling. But I think the regular one-on-ones, keeping time with them specifically, and or giving them that open forum to be able to share openly without fear of something negative happening to them for sharing how they feel. And I think that the next thing, what demonstrates or fosters that psychological safety is equal participation. And I've seen this happen where it didn't happen well, and I've seen where it's happened really well. Everyone on the team, no matter their title, has thoughts and ideas that should be brought together to the whole team for the greater good of the whole. And when you bring all the people together, when you allow people to have a voice and be taken seriously, then that truly does lead to that psychological safety where people don't feel intimidated by sharing their ideas and being able to feel like they can have equal participation, and that you can do it in person meetings, you can do it asynchronously and have idea boards, you can do it as a group, you can do it individually, you can do it private, you can do it outright. But if everyone feels heard, and even junior members of a group feel like they've been able to contribute and give ideas that are taken seriously, that's what's important. Constructive conflict, and we talked about this a little bit on the last slide, but positive friction is good. And it's okay if you have two people that aren't seeing eye to eye on a topic or an idea. Bring them together and have them come up with the resolution. Have them come up with the decision to move forward on a project, to not do a project. It encourages people to understand that it's okay to disagree, but at the end of the day, we have to walk out this door together, right? We have to all be on the same page. And one of the biggest things to do is to follow through. And when you especially in a hybrid or a virtual environment, follow through is very important because each team member should be able to hold each other accountable to deadlines or when things are, when tasks need to be completed. It shouldn't always have to run straight up the pole. There should be enough psychological safety that people feel like they can do that without having to bring in the heavy hitter or the biggest gun. And there's a really interesting study that I read, and it was about Google, and they named it Project Aristotle because Aristotle is famous for his line that said the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And Google was trying to see what was making their teams so successful. So they looked at 180 teams across the entire company of Google. And there were 4 things that came out that out of the most successful teams, these 4 things happened without even the team knowing that they were happening. Psychological safety is the first one. Dependability is the second one. So if you say you're going to do something with me, then I can depend on you to get it done without having to micromanage you. And let's talk about that for a second. Oftentimes when we're working in hybrid teams, even virtual teams, we're thinking that we have to micromanage all of the tasks. If you feel like you need to micromanage all the tasks of your team members, then there's something missing there. Yes, on your one-on-ones, you can ask the progress of a project. Yes, in a small group setting, you can say, where are we at with this? That's normal and that's regular. But when you are micromanaging and saying, do it this way, you're going to get it done faster. I need you to up the timeline. I need you to do it this way because I've done it before and it's very effective. That's micromanaging. So the 4 key findings of this were, I'm going to go back because I got on a little bit of soapbox there about dependability and micromanagement. So the first key finding from Google was psychological safety. The second was dependability. So I know you're going to do it once I give you the task. The third is structure and clarity of the work. And that goes back to the why. If you can share the why on why your team is doing what they're doing and why you're changing or adding to or asking them to do more than they were done before or they did before, if you give them the why, most people can buy in with a why. And then the fourth thing is understand their impact and how their impact affects the whole team or the whole company. And if people can understand the impact that they have on the organization as a whole, then oftentimes they can admit mistakes, ask for help, share ideas freely, and take initiative to have things get started and take initiative to do something before they're asked. And how Google measured their project was they had quantitative data, which was, bug fixes and codes, extra codes were written, codes as workarounds were written. They had qualitative feedback from executives, team members, team leads. They had qualitative data from them. And then they discovered that with the most successful teams, that the experience predicted the more subjective that a team could be, and the more experience, they could predict more success if they had harder and harder tasks to do. So if you had an effective team, you could give them harder tasks. They told them the why, they would make sure it happened. And so that was very interesting to have read that about psychological safety and how they were able to measure it, and making it measurable, they were able to take it across their whole organization and up everyone's games. So how can you start to scale trust within your own organizations? But if as we've been talking, if you've thought of any ways that you think that you can scale some trust within your own team, type some things in the chat that you think you might be able to change on a go forward basis. I'll start talking while it'll take a second for the chat to blow up. But scaling trust is really important, because trust is not a soft skill. Some people think trust is a soft skill, but it actually is an asset to help you and to be a little bit more strategic. I read a Harvard Business Review article, and it talked about high trust organizations. And in the highest trust organizations, their employees had 74% less stress. Now, who would like to have their employees have 74% less stress? I would, right? Like any of us would. And mind you, you might not have direct employees, but you have a sphere of influence. And that sphere of influence, that's what I mean by that 74% less stress. And the other thing that the study came out with was that they were, of these groups that had the 74% less stress, they had 106% more energy that they put into their projects. They were excited. They were kind of amped up, right, to go and do the work that they did. And they had less burnout. They were more engaged. And so that is fascinating to me. If you think about 106% more energy was put into their work. And we all think that we put everything we got into it every day, right? But I think oftentimes we've gotten to where we're more worried about not the day to day, but the end result. And you need to finish the tasks sometimes, although the why is out there and why you and your group are doing something. But you have to be very consistent with your group to reach that psychological safety. And Rebecca, I just saw your comment, self-accountability. I absolutely love that, and to be more present and consistent with your one-on-ones. And I will tell you that I will tell you that that is something that I still actively make sure that I consistently do. And I'll tell you that there's days that I fail, right? Because you're being sent things and you're being asked things right away. But then in the moment, I'll say, hold on just one moment. Someone just asked me a question. I got to get back to them immediately. Give me an answer right now. When a client sends me something about another rep that's complimentary about their work or how they interacted, I share that with everyone, as they may not hear it directly. I like that too. So there's a study out there, Ashley, and I wish I could quote it verbatim and exactly where it came from. But there's a study out there that says most people would rather have recognition than a raise. And so I like that you stated that, letting employees or people know that it's okay to fail. It is okay to fail, CB, and I totally agree with you that being able to be comfortable with allowing people to fail, and so much though, if you need to pick them up when they've failed and maybe do some research on why it failed, you might find that they didn't fail completely. It was maybe just some parts of the activity that they were involved in that failed. And maybe it wasn't the whole that failed. Let's see, letting staff know their efforts are appreciated. One therapist burst into tears when I said that. And no one's told her in 3 years that she's been there. Wow. Wow. That's really great. It's great and sad, right? It almost that comment almost made me go, like that's it's disheartening that no one had told her, right, in the 3 years. But I'm so glad that we did, right? because you have just possibly changed their perspective, and that's a good day for you. Now, see, take ownership and accountability, admit and own it, and we have an opportunity. I agree. I think the more that we can take ownership and accountability for when, we need to do things better, it's okay too, because we're most certainly going to have to hold people accountable that work with us. I completely agree with that. That's a great takeaway. And I do that. The third point on the slide is recognizing and rewarding trust building behaviors that you see. And you might not do that corporately. You might do it corporately in a big room or a big class. But then again, you might do it one-on-one, because not everyone likes to be appreciated in a large group. And it's funny, it's usually the people that you don't think want to be appreciated in a large group that do, and then vice versa. The people that you think don't want it do want it. So that's one of those balancing acts where those water cooler talks, right? Or those one-on-ones, or schedule a happy hour after hours and schedule some time just to spend time just talking, right? Those, if you can, if you're in the same time zone, that makes it a lot easier, right? But I work with a lot of colleagues that are on the West Coast. It'd be a little hard for me to say, hey, it's 5 o'clock my time. You want to get together and just hang out for a little while, when they still have almost half their day at home. So, but recognizing and rewarding that trust building behaviors that you see, and however you do that, like that's individual, and understanding your people and understanding how to recognize their behaviors is very important, as long as they're consistent with how they want to be recognized. Because sometimes they want to be corporately and sometimes they really don't want to, but you'll be able to find that, hopefully, that fine balance of where you can find how they would like to be rewarded and feeling that trust. All right, let's see. Oh, yeah. So lead with enrollment statements. I like that too, Ashley. That is good. And allow, I use a lot of times, my ask of you is, and that way they know what I need and they know what I want. And there's no ambiguity there. There's no thoughts there that they're not going to walk away saying, what does Jan need or what does Jan want? So I do that a lot too. I just frame it a little bit different. So with that, I think I'm going to, if nobody has any more questions, and the chat was going really quickly, I hope I got to everything. I'm going to pass it over to you, Denise.
Okay, well, thanks, Jan, and thanks to everyone for your participation. I know that really helps with moving the content along and also just like bringing it to the level that you need the content to be in order to apply it. So we really appreciate that. I just want to share a little bit of information on this same line of topics, as if you're building up these skills for leadership, whether it's your skills in building trust with your teams or coaching or using personality assessments or figuring out how to strategically lead your teams and your organizations, we do have a healthcare leadership certification. It starts with a workshop where we spend a couple of days together doing some really intense learning, and then it continues over the course of 6 months and concludes with a cohort group project in the springtime. So it's really fun. We finished our first graduating class. We've got a couple of those graduates here on this call today, and we're really excited to move into our second cohort group this year. So if that's something you're interested in, you can look up more information on it here with this QR code. You can use the discount code LEAD to get 10% off the registration price, which is currently in the early bird price phase. So take advantage of an extra discount on that before the price changes shortly. So anything else you want to add about the leadership work group, or if anyone has any questions, you're welcome to post it in the chat. That's really just give you a little bit of information here and hopefully get your interest in. Jen, unless you want to add anything else, I can wrap us up.
Yeah, go ahead. Bring us
Okay.
home.
Well, thank you again, everyone. This is, like I said, recorded. You are going to get an email notification that the recording is available if you'd like to watch it again. The link was in the Q&A. Nor posted that for us in the Q&A as well as at the beginning of our chat. So you have access to those slides as well. And then we also have a YouTube webinar page. So we will upload this presentation to that page as well, in case one of your colleagues wants to watch this and they weren't registered for the event. Once again, we really appreciate you all, and we hope you have a great rest of your week. Thanks, everyone, and thank you, Jan. We really appreciate you bringing this to us today.
Thank you.